Okay. I think over the course of the deliberations of this meetup, we have actually already discussed the role that internet plays in democracy and the realization of our rights. Actually, yesterday in her session, Her Excellency Ambassador Dr. Wagner did allude to the fact that the internet can be used as a very strong tool for demanding social accountability and social justice. And I think based on that, our panel is going to have a little deep dive into social accountability and social justice using an open internet. But before we can go any further, I would like our panel to introduce themselves and give us a few words on who you are and what you do. And I'll start to my immediate right with Mr. Handia. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Hamulilo Handia. The IT officer at Transparency International Zambia. Yes, I've been with Transparency International now for 2 years. Yes, I work closely with the communications department and all other stuff. Yes, mostly in creating systems that they use for their work, for their outreach programs and awareness.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nelson Ntongama. I'm a burning youth. I'm a sustainability practitioner. I'm a social justice advocate. I'm also a climate justice campaigner.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mwiza Zulu. I'm an artist and I'm a human rights activist. And by qualification, I'm a political scientist.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Banda. I am the Information and Advocacy Officer for the Alliance for Community Action. Like Hamulilo, I think I basically work in the Advocacy department, helping the Alliance for Community Action do their work. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So to get our discussion started, I think this is a general question that I will ask everyone. In your line of work or just your general area of interest, how has the internet played a role in creating a just society in Zambia? Andrew, you can start.
Okay, thank you. Coming from the Alliance for Community Action, so basically what the Alliance for Community Action does is instituting the demand for social accountability in the general public. What we believe is that basically things don't change in society unless general citizenry, ordinary citizens themselves start to talk about issues. So in our work, we try to sort of inform people and empower people with information on how they can interact with their elected leaders, officials, to improve service delivery, and to also talk about things which they would like to change in their general area. So basically how we've used the internet, basically, I would say is 3 ways. That's awareness, advocacy, and education. With the emphasis, again, on instituting demand, because we just don't want people to learn, but we want people to do something about it. So the internet, we found, is a low-cost platform in which it's easy to reach people. We've heard from the previous platforms about how people can just easily set up a Facebook page and start talking about things which they're passionate about. And for us as an organization, we've actually tapped into that to start and educating people about social issues which are happening, raising awareness about important things which are happening around them, and also trying to advocate for issues which will improve social accountability in Zambia. Thank you.
Mwiza, you can go next, please.
Okay, so for me in my field of work, I think the internet has definitely made things easier. I did mention that I'm an artist, and I don't consider myself an artist for purely entertainment. I consider myself as an artist who uses the art for activism. And some people tend to find that boring because, you know, they want to listen to the music to party and all of that. So sometimes it's difficult to get the same platforms that purely entertainment artists will get. But social media sort of puts a balance to that, because it's difficult to deny anyone a platform on social media, because all you have to do is create your Facebook account, your Instagram, and everything else, and you're able to reach a huge number of people. So maybe your song will not be the favorite to play on TV, but you're able to reach thousands and thousands of people on social media. My Facebook page, for example, has grown to, if I'm not mistaken, almost 150,000 followers. So I know that if I post something about my music, I will reach at least 1,000 people without having to be on ZNBC or What TV. Traditional media being very important, I should say, but social media has sort of put a balance to that. And in terms of the activism, I feel like the interaction that social media brings about gives more meaning to activism, because I feel like activism is not just about the people like us who identify ourselves as activists. It's about giving every citizen the power, every citizen the information to know that they have the power, and it is their responsibility to create a just society. So it's not just up to Mwiza and Andrew and the ACA and TIZ, but it's each and everyone's responsibility. So the fact that you're able to interact on social media without necessarily having to set up a whole PA system and this and that makes it easier to sort of pass the message around, to agree to disagree, engage in conversations that, you know, will bring about social justice. And I feel like it's also made it's given another platform for us to be able to actually reach out to leaders and people who can bring about social justice. Because sometimes you may not be able to go to State House, but you may be able to start a social media campaign that will reach the president and he'll hear about it, or reach your member of parliament or your councillor. So I feel like those aspects have made it easier. Those aspects of the internet have made the work a little easier.
Okay, so I'm going to answer it with reference to the same way education has done to equalize money, finances, and all that, even if you're not born from a family that has got all the finances, but education is being dubbed to be the equalizer. I think that's what the internet has done. So traditionally, you could have radio, newspapers, and TV as the only sources of communication. But what has happened now is that we have got the internet, where even the people that do not have access to TV, the people that do not have the most money, can simply go to the internet, create a website, use social media to send out their message. I was happy when one of the people that was asking said they got an opportunity to attend this event through social media. They had to apply to come to this event. So traditionally, you'd have to be advertised on TV, on radio, or even on newspapers. But now, just at the click of a button, things are happening. We won't even talk about our president, how he got his name Bali. We all used to know him as HH. But on the internet, on the comments, somebody referred to him as Bali. And today, he trended, probably even helped him get into State House because you could relate with the younger generation. So those are some of the things that the internet has done. Previously, it wasn't the case. You have to go to ZNBC, you have to go to Phoenix, you have to go to all these big media houses to have your art, your skill, your message taken across. But what is happening now, there is just a balance. I won't even talk about the comedians, the musicians that we never first got to saw on TV or on radio, but we first had to see them on Facebook. We first saw them on Twitter, and then now they are one of the most happening artists that the country is talking about. So that just goes to talk about how much the internet has changed the landscape of advocacy, and also of those of us that follow these trends to really put our message across.
And Hamulilo.
I think I can say the internet is the backbone of what we do right now. It has really helped us when it comes to sensitization, advocacy, and awareness building. Yes, a lot of our activities are around these 3 points. Yes, so with the internet in Zambia, and maybe what I can say, the increased usage of the internet in Zambia, yes, we're now able to reach so many more people. Yes, we're looking at, there are almost 2 million people on Facebook across the country. Yes, so it's not only an issue, it's not only a situation where only people in urban areas are using the internet, as we go into the field, we've noticed that more and more people in rural areas have access to internet, and it has really, really helped our work. Yes, we are able to reach more people, we are able to send messages to people, we're able to carry out research with different online tools. Yes, normally you had to go to a rural area or a village with paper, do a survey in person. We're able to do surveys very quickly right now. Yes, so the internet has really opened up Zambia for us. It has really helped us with our work massively, yes. I think it has been really a game changer, especially within these past 2 years.
Okay. And holding on to the thought of the internet being a game changer and the backbone of what you do, how important is the internet to Transparency International Zambia? And you have mentioned that you're using it more for your work, you're using it more to do some research, but what are the other areas that you've used the internet to expand the work of Transparency International Zambia?
So apart from research, we've really been able to put our message out there, yes, where our focus is the fight against corruption, yes. And we really believe that we can change the mindset of Zambians. We can remove the mentality of corruption is normal. Yes, corruption is something which we should all see as abnormal and something which is strange, which should be fought, which should be alien to Zambia, so to say, yes. And with the internet, we're able to get this message out there. We're able to, I think we're beginning to see a little bit the signs that people are no longer tolerating corruption, yes. And a big part of that is the constant message, not only from Transparency International, but also from the government, from different people, as more and more people are pushing out the message of corruption is evil, corruption is the root cause for a lot of problems out there. Yes, this message has really been spread well through the internet, and hopefully, yes, and we are very optimistic that going forward we could look at a situation in which we could see ourselves winning this fight against corruption, yes. So I can put that down to mostly because of the internet and how we're able to leverage on it as a communications platform.
Okay, and I'll throw the same question over to Andrew. How important is an open internet to the ACA and the work you do, particularly in social justice campaigns?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think the internet is something like Hamulilo has said, has been the backbone for ACA. I think most of the work which we do offline didn't really have a voice until we started using social media. So you'd find most of the ways which a lot of people know us by and also don't know that we're behind some of them is through the internet. I'll give an example of some of the prominent campaigns which we've done, which most of them started online and translated offline into action. One of them, which at the top of my head, is the Yellow Card campaign. The Yellow Card campaign is something which just started online as a way to demand accountability against all the injustices and the corruption which were happening in the country. That campaign picked up very quickly. I remember when we were measuring the metrics at one time, our hashtags was used over 5,000 times in a day by people across Facebook and Twitter. So you find that people started talking about this. And then the next thing we said, okay, since people are responding to this, we're going to have a protest. And that protest happened. There was a lot of dilly-dallying from the government. Then they didn't want it to happen. But it eventually happened because there was a lot of pressure. A lot of people were talking about it. And for them, for the government, it would have been seen as if they are being against the people's wishes. So they had to bow to that. I'll talk about Debt Concerns Me. Debt Concerns Me is something which started online during a time when the government then was denying that Zambia had a debt problem. So we demanded, this hashtag trended, we trained people offline and people started using it online and people were talking, and eventually the State House had to respond to those concerns and come out and actually say, okay, we do have a debt problem, but everyone has a debt problem. That was just paraphrasing there. Other campaigns like the 42 for 42, and I also wanted to talk something about very prominent, which is Bill 10 must fall. So this campaign really popularized the ills which were in Bill 10. We did one time just a random sample of asking people who were doing interviews with online across the country. Have you heard about Bill 10? Where did you hear it from? 99.9% of them were saying, I heard it from online. None of the big medias at the time were pushing the narrative about how evil Bill 10 is. So it wasn't getting prominence on TV, but it was getting a lot of attention online, and people were talking about it. And because of this, it meant that even those opposition members who may have wanted to vote for Bill 10 had to think twice about their prospects for the future if they wanted to stay in power, and they had to stay in line. So I'd say we've really used social media because it's cheap, it can reach a lot of people. Of course, not everyone is online, but really when you start online, it usually translates offline. So there's a lot of power to social media. Thank you.
Okay, I want to play a little bit to the dark side and ask each panelist, what does a closed internet look like to you? And how would this affect the way that you go about your work? And I think I'll start with Mwiza.
Okay, when you say closed internet, I'm reminded about how the internet was literally closed for a bit during the 2021 elections. So that could be one of the literal ways, because the internet at that point didn't exist for a little bit. And we had to use VPN and all of those things. But I feel like a closed internet is also an internet space where people cannot freely express themselves. And I think we see that more since 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Because before that, we had more of the physical intimidation. We had cadres that would beat you up if you talk too much and things like that. But today, I think that has come online. So you can barely make any statement speaking about something that you feel that the current government has done wrong without a swarm of, I'll call them cadres, coming for you online and attacking you online. So because of that, if you don't have the thick skin, you stop speaking out, because you say, they're going to say this about me, they'll attack my physical appearance, they'll attack this and that, this and that. For some of us, your family and all of that. So I feel like that is sort of hindering the internet space from being a platform for people to freely express themselves and have open conversations, especially about governance.
Nelson, you mentioned that you're into climate justice and you're into social change. What does a closed internet look like for you?
So we'll be talking about an environment where when you're sending out a particular message, it has to be curtailed, it has to be censored, where people cannot be given the freedom to express things how they feel and how they're supposed to be addressed. I would want to dive a little bit on the political side, also referring to what had happened in 2021, where election results were coming in left and right, center. Other results were unbelievable, others were too well. So what we noticed was that the government of the day decided for some hours to shut down the internet. So you find that there wasn't so much of information that was going around in terms of how many constituencies that yet to go, how far the elections, who is winning, who is losing, and all is that. So what happened is that citizens were kept in the dark, and there was some form of panic. Not until the geniuses figured it out that, oh, there's actually VPN. So those are some of the examples that most of us can relate to, because they are quite recent. So if you have an internet that is closed, it's not just in politics. Even with our friends that were talking about advocacy with disabilities and sensitization and all that. So you find there might be people that do not want their agenda to be pushed forward, and they want to curtail their message. So that will amount to not having an open internet in this case.
Hamulilo, you did mention that you work very closely with the communications team at Transparency International. What would a closed internet look like for you?
For me, a closed internet would be summarized in one word: hell.
Okay.
Yes. If you look, a number of people have spoken on the 2021 elections. Yes. Luckily, I worked on an elections project which we had. Yes, and we already anticipated that the government might do something like that. Yes, and if you look at it, the majority of our budget when it came to monitor, since we had monitors around the country who we had to communicate with to tally results and different things like that. So in the planning of how they are going to continue communicating with us, we had to buy devices we had to plan for VPNs. I can say significant, I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it was over 30% of the budget for monitoring elections was just on equipment, just to get over this blockage which might happen and which happened. Yes, so I think a closed internet is something which is very terrifying, something which is very bad for open communications, for democracy, for social justice. Yes, and the way we should look at it, we shouldn't only look at it in a total closure of the internet. Yes, I believe it starts as a slippery slope. And most of the time it comes under the guise of fighting misinformation. So they'll block one site, ban one user, and from there you have more and more sites being blocked before eventually you end up with a situation maybe like the Great Firewall of China or how Russia is here. So I think we need, and I'm sure we're going to touch on misinformation later on in our discussion. Yes, but we need to be aware that most of the time that's where it starts from. It's just one or two things, and from there it snowballs down the hill. Before long you notice that you have a closed internet situation on your hands.
Okay, and Andrew, very briefly, what does a closed internet look like to you?
In brief, I'll just actually ride on what everyone else has said.
Okay. I feel like the trauma of that internet shutdown is still very fresh in our minds, and every time the internet is slower than usual, we're now asking ourselves, is this happening again? Nelson and Mwiza, you spoke very, very emphatically on the internet shutdown of 2021. Could you just walk us through what that experience was like for you before it happened, during the actual shutdown, and afterwards, and how this shaped the way you approach the internet to do your work, and maybe some of the safeguards you might have put in place as a result of that?
Okay. Firstly, before just the elections, I want you to bring to your attention of certain things that were happening that were more like deriving a certain narrative. So I'm going to talk of something that came out in the media, that there were two companies, one based in the United States and the other one based in London, that had prophesied that the current government would win the elections by 50%. For me, when I read that, it was more like trying to prepare your mind already for the outcome of the elections, even if people have not voted yet. So what happened is that even when we were voting, we were like, okay, the experts from the UK, they have done their analysis. They are saying this government that is sitting is going to win the elections. Thanks to the SEC, there were a lot of programs that were done prior to the elections that were talking about the internet safe space, and also with Bloggers of Zambia. We did a training on VPN. I actually never used to know about VPN. I used to think it's some form of Facebook of some sort. But after that training, a lot of young people got on board with how to use a virtual private network. During the time of, and even just before the elections, we noticed that there was a very famous protest that was conducted by young people that came to be known as the Bush protest. So the idea was that you knew if you're going to fight the government on the ground, they have the police, they've got the tear gas. They'll beat you home and dry. What happened is that the young people improvised and went on the internet and did a virtual protest. And even if the government then had shut down the internet, there were other soldiers that were online to make sure that if the internet is shut down, we stream live on virtual network, on VPN. When it came to the actual day of elections, what actually happened is that the things that most people that were in the space were predicting could happen were the shutdown of the internet. Sooner or later, many of us went to Sweden, to the United States, to Canada. We're all over the world using a VPN. And the government did not see it coming. So that got to show how much of the internet had a terrifying on the young people, because now we had to go into spaces where we are not familiar with, but we are good for growth and for advocacy. And I think even the current government should have picked one or two lessons. That's why maybe they are a little bit hands-off on shutting down the internet. But all in all, the lessons that were picked up strongly is that the internet is a safe space for many people. And most of us, the young people, will go to the space where we feel we can best express ourselves, which is online. And that's why most of these advocacy stories start online and they translate to the ground.
Okay. Mwiza, your experience with the 2021 shutdown and the lessons learned?
I think 2021 and slightly before, slightly after was quite a significant time for young people and especially using the internet. I think prior to the 2021 elections, we had some sort of revolution happening. There was a lot of young people speaking out online and offline, even though a lot of it was happening online, speaking out about the ills of the time, the corruption and the cadarism and all those things. And the bush protest that Nelson just spoke about, I feel like is one of the most significant things I've done for me in my activism, because it began as a group of young people who wanted to protest over young people's issues, and them being denied the opportunity to do that. And you realize that, oh, there's actually another space that we can do this on, because if we actually, like Nelson said, if we actually go head to head with state forces, we will die, you know. So I feel like being part of that actually opened my eyes to the realization of how strong the internet can be, how much the internet can be used, because that protest actually got the attention of even the president then himself when he spoke about it in parliament. And even in regards to reaching people, there was millions and millions of people who watched that protest. So I feel like that was very significant in showing young people especially that you don't have to wait for physical platforms to air out the things that you want to air out. You can actually use the internet to speak out on issues that affect you and issues that affect the country. Personally, I also dedicated, I think the month before elections, I dedicated most of my platforms to voter education. Because at that time I got to realize you don't know how many people actually don't know that it's an X that you're supposed to put on the ballot, you know. So I feel like that also was very helpful, because you get to engage with other people, get to be asked questions, respond to questions, provide accurate information, and because there's a lot of misinformation also on the internet. So I feel like that was an opportunity to conduct a lot of voter education for me personally, and I utilized strictly the internet. I don't think I was on any radio station during that period to talk about voter education specifically. So I feel like that's some of the ways in which the internet was quite significant during the 2021 period. So it was quite scary when it was shut down for those
communities. There are not so many homes that do have this access. We need to make sure that the people that are online, those that have got access to internet, we maximize on the numbers such that by the time we're going to the ground, the momentum is already built up. Andrew already gave examples of things such as the butane, the bush protest that Mwiza and I spoke about, and also the debt, the Zambia debt structuring program. All those people started on the internet. By the time they're getting to the ground, one or two people didn't know about them. Why? Because of the same issues of exclusivity, where they cannot really choose to buy bundles in their phone when they do not have food at home. So those are some of the challenges that we might have also with advocacy on the internet.
Okay. And sorry, just to take you back, I feel like the misinformation that we just spoke about is also quite a huge challenge when it comes to using the internet space, because as much as people with the right intention and the right information can use the internet, people with the wrong information can do it as well. And in fact, misinformation can be used as a weapon, because you will go on and talk about how butane is bad, and these are the reasons why butane is bad. It just takes one other person with a following, just like you have, to, you know, bring some misinformation, and, you know, it creates this whole debate, like, no, but this one said this is good, and this one said this is bad, so there's a lot of confusion. So I feel like misinformation is quite the challenge as well.
Okay, and as you wrap up this discussion, I would like for everyone to touch on what are your hopes for an open internet in the future? And I will start to my far right with Andrew. Andrew, come all the way here.
Okay, thank you. I think my hopes for an open internet can be threefold. The first one is legislative. I feel we're not having a bigger enough conversation when it comes to legislation around the internet. Why I say this specifically focusing on the activists is that most of the time, activists such as Mwiza and Nelson are the first line of defense who face the fire. Before every one of us can be brave enough to speak up, there are people who are speaking up, and we make sure that those people are protected. So when we have good legislation which opens up the internet, it means at least we've done a lot of work, and they can do the rest. And by the time they're speaking up and we're hearing about these things, we can jump on. So legislation, I think, is very important. And I hope that we have a big enough conversation talking about this and learning as well. We may have different perspectives, but I think we can eventually come to a more futuristic and more accommodating pace. The second part, which has been talked about, I'll leave the rest for the others, I think is a more inclusion when it comes to internet. The internet is still very urban-based, even though it's now penetrating the rural area.
And block different aspects of the online space.
Thank you everyone so much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for this very able panel. And of course, to our very able moderators who are Mutinta Nachengwa, another round of applause. So, we're going to take 3 questions from the audience, but before we do that, I know that the last speaker did summarize openness, the laws that we pass, the, what do you call it, being careful and all the stuff. How, to the panel, just about 30 seconds each, how do you reconcile the issue of open internet, open laws with national values and standards? Because when you get to that point, you're talking about the so-called cultural values, you're talking about other values that are religious and other stuff. And so what is it that we need to do to ensure that we're passing these laws, but at the same time, our national values are taken into account? So while the audience thinks about that, can we take 2 or 3 questions? I can see there's a hand over there. There's a hand at the back and Mr. Mlumbi. So we'll take those 3 questions. So let's start with the gentleman, then we'll go to Mr. Mlumbi and Mutinta. Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to get some clarification on the understanding that we have of the use of the internet, because the internet is vast and the majority of the conversation is leaning on social media. Understandably so, but given that we have a platform, or most of us here have a platform to help teach people to use the internet and not just social media, how do you avoid giving off subjective and objective views that may lead to herding within spaces that, again, we do not fully understand? I like how the last gentleman explained that we should let the internet or the cyberspace evolve as it is naturally right now, so that we can collect a bit more data and then create systems that can help us better design ways of generating data, as well as using the data that we can collect while it's being made in the cyberspace as it is.
So I guess that has to do with the rights and responsibilities. Thank you. Let's Mr. Mlumbi over there.
Thank you so much to the panelists. I think that was great conversation. I would like to find out if you could address the issue of threats to an open internet. One of them, probably, like you mentioned, in 2021, when we had the shutdown, is probably the government interference. So for me, I would like to know how best we can either avert or address those threats, so that we get to deter any future actions that may seem to restrict people's access to the internet. We know when the road becomes bumpy, governments, not just here, I think in Africa and other places, they seem to have the appetite to kind of interfere with the access to the internet.
Okay, so my question, first of all, has to do with electronic data protection. Any of the people on the panel can pick it up. Of course, the Act, the 2009 Act, has specifically mentioned of protection of individual details in the data of every citizen. So now, for us to have like an open space, internet, of course, an open internet, what are we doing that is going to make sure that it, in terms of in line with the statutory, of course, documents over the same Electronic Data Protection Act, what are we doing to make sure that every citizen is protected? Because the Act says that they will safeguard the details of every citizen, regarding, of course, the well-being of a citizen. Then the second one, I would like to find out regarding, of course, this has to do with ATI as well, the access to information. For in terms of, we know every human being has a civic right and votes, including people with disability. So in this, in regards to that, what are we doing to make sure that we have information, even the people with disability have information on the ATI regarding on how best they could hold their leaders accountable? Because I believe if we go into the circles of people with disability, a lot of them would tell you they don't know about the ATI and how they could do social accountability. So as maybe Alliance for Accountability, for Action, that deals with accountability, what are we doing? And then the last one is the gentleman in the, should be the middle, he mentioned he's into climate, of course, change and advocacy. I would like to find out what you are going to, maybe the suggestion or submissions you've made out there to make sure that young people of Zambia are part of the negotiation processes. Of course, it can either be physical or online-wise regarding the coming COP28, of course, that is going to be in Dubai. And you know, a lot of our young people don't have enough finances to travel there. So in regarding with the internet space in the climate change sector, maybe you can shed more light on what you're doing. Thank you, and I submit.
All right, panel. So you've got 3 questions plus the one I asked earlier. But before we do that, when you go outside, there's a desk for everyone. Anyone who needs cyber security help. Because I mean, the time we've been here, I'm sure that most of us have learned about the importance of value of cybersecurity. So outside here, there's a desk where they can help you anytime from lunch going up. So thank you very much. Panel, you can pick up those questions.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll just quickly go through them. I think addressing to your question, I think stakeholder engagement, I think there's no two way around it. We all have different perceptions and experiences, and our cultures are very diverse, but there always is a meeting point of all these concerns. And I also like to remind people, mostly personally, that first of all, our culture is beautiful. It's not perfect, but our cultures are beautiful. But at the same time, we make culture. The culture does not make us. So if there are things which we think are detrimental to our moving forward, we can change them as a people and develop new cultures. So we don't have to live as our forefathers lived, who are maybe living in caves. We don't live in caves anymore. We live in brick houses. The second question which was brought about how we are pondering towards social media more than other technology where the internet is brought about. I think when it comes to that, Zambia being a young nation when it comes to internet, you have to go where the majority are. But that doesn't, that still doesn't mean that we do not experiment with other technologies. Like, for example, I'll talk about many organizations that have developed mobile apps to reach out to people who can have mobile apps. I'll talk about people who use USSD to reach out to people who have that functionality. People have websites, and their websites function in different ways, and people are experimenting. So in as much as we are talking about what everyone else is using, organizations are being very genius about ways to experiment more about reaching the population creatively. So our sense is to achieve our objective, and we're thinking, what can we use to achieve our objective best? And then while also still keeping the spirit of experimenting alive. Going to the threats of internet, which was talked about, I think we need to deal with the sentiments, because like I talked about, most of how we get these bad laws, sometimes they're sentiment driven. Over half, I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm pretty sure over half the number of people agree about the cyber bill, agree with the cyber bill because of how it was talked about. It doesn't matter whether everything which was talked about is not true, but people believe that because that's their lived experience. They've experienced cyberbullying. So if the government is saying we're introducing a bill to deal with cyberbullying, they don't even know if it's in there, but that's their lived experience. So I think we need to do a lot of sensitization and education to deal with people's lived realities so that they understand and they can come to the table and say, how can we make a more safer internet? I think there was one more which was addressed directly to me concerning the ATI from Mutinta. When it comes to the ATI is part of the Open Space Zambia project at the moment, specifically doing online advocacy and citizen education. So we have been trying as much as possible to be very inclusive. We've done citizen in-circles in 3 districts at the moment. We've done in Lusaka, we've done in Chongwe, we've done in Kawe. We're going to do in Kafue and again in Lusaka. So we are trying as much as possible to put out that information, but at the end of the day, as was mentioned by an earlier session, is that we are a very small organization. We can reach so many people, but it's up to the people who hear what we're talking about and are convicted and can carry the message to the other people. And that's what we rely on a lot. That's why we want the people to understand access to information as their right so that they can tell other people. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll just address the first 2 questions about protecting culture and protecting people online. Yes, I think this goes to the former point which I made. I think we need to be careful when creating laws that protect people. If you look at history, the majority of wars that have been fought in the name of God. I think also if you look at it also from a censorship point of view and oppressing people, a lot of oppression and censoring of people is done in the name of protecting people. So we really need to be careful. I think we need to trust ourselves more. We need to trust the public that they will know what is right. We need to trust them that they will safeguard their own culture. And as Andrew said, it's people who make culture. Yes, so we can't exactly pass a law that, no, we need to block this content or that content or that vice. Put vice in inverted commas because for some people they are not vices. Yes. So I think we need to trust people. We need to remember the internet is quite new. Yes, it's not that old. And if you look just 4 years ago, or 7 years ago, 2016, fake news and misinformation was such a big topic. Everybody thought it was going to cause the end of civilization. Yet look now, a few years later, almost all of us know how to identify fake news, how to keep ourselves well informed, yes. So I think we shouldn't have knee-jerk reactions. We shouldn't be so quick to pass, especially laws, because once a law is passed, it's very hard to repeal it, as we are seeing now with the cybersecurity law, which is currently receiving submissions for revision. Yes, so I think we should be very careful, and we need to trust the public. Yes, they can police themselves, they can monitor themselves.
I want to agree with what both of the previous speakers have said. And I feel like I'd like to address, I think 3 of these questions can also be attributed to personal responsibility when it comes to using the internet. Because the moderator asked about how we preserve our national values while using the internet. And like it's been said, you can't really put a law. Like it's difficult to make legislation in terms of that. But you know, it's really up to the people that are using the internet to regulate themselves and make sure that they're respecting the national values and principles. There was also a question about threats to an open internet, and I feel like during our discussion I talked about how sometimes the threats are the people that are using the internet themselves, the citizens themselves. So again, it borders on personal responsibility and having a changed mindset when it comes to using the internet. Mutinta asked about how citizens and their information can be protected. I know we hate doing this, but it's your responsibility, for example, to read the terms and conditions before you sign on to Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp or whatever it is. So I feel like there's a lot that can be done outside that, but I feel like personal responsibility is a major part of having an open internet.
All right, I think most of the questions have been tackled. I'm just going to do the last 2 that Mutinta had asked. So the first one was on the data protection. I'm of the strong view that most of us go to use internet without really knowing what we are doing. We expose much of our information there, our phone numbers, we put ourselves at so much risk without even, our locations and all those things. We put ourselves at so much risk without even considering the risks that come with that. One of the first things that we can first do as individuals, let me give an example of the common tool that we use. Facebook, for example, has got a 2-factor authentication where if somebody logs into your account, it sends a message to your phone that you have to input the password, and then that's when you log in. It's just a small example, but I realize that most of these digital tools that we use, they have got more security features put in place. It's just up to us to read through their security policy and then see if we can agree to it. And then also it has to do with the use of passwords. The use of passwords, you use the same password on all the apps, where if one app is hacked, if it's your bank account, meaning everywhere else you are at risk, also poses a great danger. I've noticed even some people also save their passwords on their phone where it's just written bank account, Barclays, and then you have got the passwords there. It also puts a risk to that. And then also going beyond, on the government side, I think there is need to put up a body of a sort that both has, it's multi-sectoral, does not just have government agencies in it, but also has got people from CSOs such as Action Aid, such as the Alliance for Community Action, Bloggers of Zambia, Transparency International. It has got all these stakeholders so that whenever a policy is brought up or whenever protection has to be enforced, we have got a multi-sector approach to some of these dangers that we are having on the internet. The last question that you asked was directed to me concerning how we are playing a part in making sure that young people attain the COP 2023. So when you look at the websites of some of these, there are some scholarships that they do offer, more of subsidized trips that they do offer. There are a lot of partners that do come for that. Before we even go anywhere, we can look at some of the partners that are there that do offer some sponsored trips. Also, what was noticed last year is that most people did not have access because it was not online. Some of the programs were not online. From what I wrote, I have not followed it up yet, but from what I read in the previous report was that they intend to also put it online. So in case some of us might not be able to attend physically, we have got an opportunity to attend to the event online. Thank you.
Right, so yeah, we're going to take three last questions for this session, and then I don't know if Mutinta have got something to add, but before we do that, and for this question, would like Chapter 1 Foundation to probably add a voice, and also Mr. Mlumbi, Simon, can you hear us? So when we talk about international, global, or universal standards, one of the challenges you find is the lack of a binding mechanism. For example, when you go to, what do you call that, the periodic review mechanism in Geneva at the Human Rights Commission, that's where civil society and the United Nations, together with governments, come together to take stock of some of these international standards, especially governance of the internet. You find a country can actually decide to accept or to not, but there's nothing that is really binding. So in that case, when it comes to issues to do with justice and internet governance, how does this pose a challenge, and what is it that we need to be doing in the absence of binding mechanisms? So maybe the panel can attempt that, but let's see if we can hear from Chapter 1 Foundation. We can also go to Human Rights Commission and get back to the panel. But let's start with Chilombo from Chapter 1 Foundation.
Thank you for that question. With regard to international standards and binding mechanisms, the core, the center of international law and all international mechanisms is state sovereignty. So states have sovereignty which they exercise freely and at will. When they enter into binding treaties, binding agreements, they give up some of that sovereignty, or they allow for you to question their actions to a certain limit, but they don't entirely give up their sovereignty. So for the process like the UPR that you pointed out, it's a, what's the word? It's voluntary. It's a voluntary process that states submit to on a peer-to-peer basis. Peer-to-peer being other states are asking other states questions about their international standards, their compliance with international human rights law. So it's, for instance, all of us in this room represent different countries. I represent Zambia. I will come to explain to you that as far as the freedom of expression has gone, this is how far we've gone. These are the challenges that we're facing. The other countries in the room will then start asking questions. Oh, but we heard that last year somebody was arrested for defamation of the president. We heard that you still have criminal defamation in your statute books. So that's how the UPR process works. It's voluntary. There are, however, more binding procedures being based on international agreements or treaties that states sign. So for instance, if you have an issue that you would like to take to an international forum, you would go to the African Commission, for instance, which would then hear your complaint and give a recommendation. But again, there's the issue of sovereignty, which you can't really get over and you can't really ignore because it's always there. States always have the power to, like you said, they can get a recommendation at the UPR stage and simply note it. The way that these systems work is we're playing on the principle of naming and shaming. States get benefits from showing that they are obliging by their international obligations. They get agreements, they get IMF bailouts based on how they treat their citizens. Whether you have a high human rights standing or low human rights standing affects whether people want to do business with your country. If they know that in your country human rights abuses run rampant, they won't come and invest. And so this naming and shaming is airing your dirty laundry. When we go to the UPR process, we submit shadow reports as civil society organizations. We say, okay, the state has said this, but as the civil society, this is our version of events. And then the countries take those reports and say, oh, but you're saying this. The civil societies have said this. What are you saying? That naming and shaming and all of those processes, they help us in some way. I understand that it might be a very frustrating thing to hear that, oh, they just noted and nothing happens. But in the long run, these incremental steps are what help us get liability for the government at an international level. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Sia from Mulombe.
Thank you so much. I think Chilombo has adequately addressed, I think, the way the mechanisms kind of work. But perhaps just to add that one of the biggest challenges is, like she alluded to, enforcement. So the enforcement mechanism has always been a big gap when it comes to these international frameworks. So what you get is a forum or a platform where they'll put a spotlight, on you, probably what you are doing right and what you're not doing right. So basically that should create that self-consciousness as a country that, if you are always, like Zambia has been participating, I think, for the 4th time, the same issues are coming up and you're not doing anything. So what does it tell about you? So it really tells a bad story about you, and probably people think that whatever you commit at that level is something that is just for the sake of it, not that you are serious about getting the issues done and the conditions changing on the ground. So the other issue, just what I want to add, is also it is dependent on what we do here at home. So when you look at those concluding observations and recommendations of these treaty bodies, they are given to the country to implement and come up with a way of how they are going to do that. So like here, we have should be a recommendations implementation, is it committee or some mechanisms, which is hosted by Ministry of Justice. We are part of that. We are sitting there. This is kind of trying to coordinate all these recommendations. Which recommendations are to be implemented by different ministries? So you're talking about technocrats sitting in different ministries who are supposed to do one or two things. So ideally, you have policymakers who move with a policy, but when it comes to implementation, it is the technocrats sitting in these institutions. So it comes back to us. What is it that we are doing to make these technocrats move? Because at their speed, that's how far you will go. So policymakers, they come, they change, but you still have the same technocrats sitting there. So I think the key is to push the technocrats, that they're supposed to be the ones to, initiate and probably speed up, this kind of thing that we're talking about. So without, the technocrats, making a move, it really just becomes a matter of policy, and politicians will just be talking about it. So we need to, I think, for me as one of the advocacy actions, to begin to engage the real people with the mandate to execute. I think that's what I would add. Thank you.
So as the panel responds, I think that the last part of his contribution becomes very important, pushing the technocrats. You might want to also share your experiences of that process.
Okay, I'll start first. I think I want to add on what they've said. Basically, I just wanted to say I think the enforcement and the binding is the citizens. We've seen world over, not just in Zambia, that when citizens and when ordinary people understand the link between them not having something in their lives and this thing not being done, they rise up and they talk to their politicians and things get done. I think one of the weaknesses in Zambia is not just enforcement, is that citizens do not understand why these things matter. It's too high level, it's too technical, and I think as civil society and as citizens who understand these concepts, it's up to us to make sure that citizens understand, to say, your lack of water in your community is because the government is dragging their feet to do this. And once citizens start to connect these things, more citizens start to speak up, and you see that the feet of government will start to move much quicker. Thank you.
I think also, riding on the last point of pushing the technocrats, I want to agree with Andrew that a lot of the conversations that I had are quite technical. So if you go into the compound or whatever else and ask a random 18-year-old if they understand what this absence of binding mechanisms does for them and their ability to speak out and this and that, it becomes, they probably will say, what are you talking about? So I feel like we need to break down the conversation, make it easier for the ordinary person to understand beyond just the activists and the CSOs, because it's about the citizen. It's about that young person in the compound who will not understand the technicalities that the CSOs and the lawyers and the Human Rights Commission may understand. So I feel like that I just want to say that that's quite important when it comes to advocacy.
Okay, I think my only contribution, yes, I agree with what they said, but I think it should also be extended also to civil society. Yes, not all of us also have the knowledge, especially when it comes to laws. Yes, I think also education of us, civil society, yes, would also help, yes, with the topic as well.
All right, so we also have people that are following online. I'm not sure if we have any contributions. We don't have any contributions. I think what remains for me is to thank Mutinta for this great moderation and the entire panel. We can give them a round of applause for a job well done.